The Unitarian Universalist Church is located at 490 Aguita Road on the east side of Highway 1 at the Highway 68 exit to Pacific Grove and in the opposite direction. These services are at 10:30 and everyone is welcome. And also find us online at uucmp.org. Welcoming all, we worship together with loving hearts and open minds, promoting peace, equality, respect for the earth, questioning, reflecting, learning, leading. We change ourselves as we change the world.
Good morning. My name is Mibs McCarthy, and I'm chair of the Social Justice Committee. Welcome to all, old friends and newcomers. I extend a special welcome to anyone visiting with us for the first or second time. If you have not done so, we ask that you fill out a yellow visitor card at the welcome table in the welcome hall. We are a congregation that welcomes people of any age, race, class, religion, or sexual orientation, or political view to join in a covenant of respect and compassion in forming our spiritual community. Our purpose is to change our own lives even as we work to change the world around us through love, learning, and service to others. There are many opportunities here to do those things and make enriching human connections. Please note the upcoming events listed in your bulletin. I have a special announcement that if you are a 7th to 9th grader here for the OWL class, you should already be with your peers in the fireside room. So if you... Okay. Today's music is presented by Tennessee O'Hanlon on piano and clarinet, David Hurdle on guitar, Karen Araujo, Valerie Hurdle, and Camille Harrison on vocals. Thank you all for your beautiful music this morning. Mysterious, superstitious, Friday the 13th of November is Gavel. What service will you donate for UUCMP's auction? Check the gavel table for ideas today, and next week is the deadline for signing up. Volunteers are needed while we are waiting to find a new sexton. Can you help with any special tasks? Are you willing to lock up after worship or meetings? To volunteer, contact the office, please, and we appreciate that. There is a new task force forming regarding sanctuary decor and is asking for your input. Please complete the survey on the website that's listed in your order of service, or complete a paper survey found on a table in the welcome hall. And there's a Fellowship Fest and Talent Show coming up, Saturday, October 17th at 2 p.m. The talent show and ice cream will be included. Sign up at the stewardship or gavel table on Sunday. And today at noon, the Social Justice Committee will be meeting in the conference room at the end of the welcome hall. If you have any interest in this area, even if you've never attended, you are welcome.
call to worship today is a poem by Rainer Maria Rilke. It's just called A Walk. My eyes already touch the sunny hill going far ahead on the road I've begun. So we are grasped by what we cannot grasp. It has its inner light, even from a distance, and changes us. Even if we do not reach it, changes us into something else, which, hardly sensing it, we already are. A gesture waves us on, answering our own wave, but what we feel is the wind in our faces. And to Rilke's poem, I say, take a walk today. Come feel the wind in your face. Come know the possibilities. Come to worship.
If we are not careful, it is easy for fear and greed to rule over our lives. And this can have damaging consequences, not only for ourselves, but for our whole society. In his book, Collapse, author Jared Diamond warns of the unsustainable use of the environment, using the example of how Easter... Sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry?
That's okay. We have recently changed our order of service. You can direct complaints to our new ministers.
Sorry.
So Jared Diamond uses the example of how Easter Island was overpopulated and deforested, severely damaging the island's ecosystem. Singer Neil Young warns of the same thing happening on a global scale in his song that is our musical interlude for this morning's service, After the Gold Rush. Usually we think of fear and greed as being about poverty, money, and wealth. The family I grew up in was an exception to this. My grandfather, my father's father, was a successful businessman, but he and my father did not get along well. My father would tell me the story of how he was once approached in a bar by a group of men who were very unhappy with the hardball business tactics practiced by my grandfather. So my father was skeptical about business and material success. And my mother shared this skepticism, perhaps in part because of her Puritan cultural ancestry. I wish I could stand up here today and say that I was raised without fear and greed, but I was not. It simply came in a different form. I was raised with the fear of being ignorant and being deceived, and with a greed for knowledge. For example, my mother taught me about how advertisers use images that we don't perceive consciously, but that still influence our emotions on a subconscious level. There was a fear of the many ways in which we are snookered into believing things that are not true. And with this fear came a greed for books, a greed that unfortunately my mother and I share. Reverend John Behrens once told me that Unitarian Universalism is not the religion of the book, but the religion of the books. If so, then I am in the right religion, because I have too many books. And most of these books have not made me wiser because I haven't had time to read them. I can relate well to the story of the Sufi poet Rumi, who was at first a successful scholar with many books. Rumi then meets the mystic Shams, not our Shams, the mystic Shams of several centuries ago. He throws Rumi's books into the river, because the books will not help him to reach the ultimate connection with the divine that Rumi seeks. Shams is reported to have said, "A donkey with a load of books is still a donkey." I see three ways out of the destructive cycle of fear and greed. One is the path of self-sufficiency and personal achievement, of acquiring property, money, and knowledge to protect against personal poverty, destitution, and ignorance. This is the dominant path of our American secular culture. A second is the path of renunciation, of equanimity, of making peace with our limited knowledge and limited ability to alleviate suffering by material means. This is the path of mysticism, of Buddhism and related spiritual traditions. The third is the path of community and covenant, the theme for this month's services at UUCMP. This is the path of protecting each other and protecting those who are the weakest at any given time from the dangers of poverty, ignorance, and fraud. In my personal view, all three paths, self-sufficiency, equanimity, and community, in balance and moderation, are needed and necessary. Please join me, rise if you are willing and able, in singing the old Shaker hymn, hymn number 16, in your hardcover hymnal, "'Tis a Gift to Be Simple."
Let's sing it together twice. Tis a gift to be simple, tis a gift to be free, tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves in a place just right, to be in the valley of love and delight, when true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed to turn, we are delight, turning, we come round right. 'Tis a gift to be simple, 'tis a gift to be free, 'tis a gift to come down where we ought to be, and when we find ourselves in the place just right, 'twill be a valley of love and delight, when true simplicity is gained, to bow and to bend, we shan't be ashamed to turn, will be our delight, turning, we'll come down right.
Now is the time in our service when we invite you to join us in contemplation. In our congregation this morning, we have very good news from Tim Wilson. Tim recently went through a very difficult, intensive heart surgery, but the surgery went well, and he is now back on the Monterey Peninsula, and in fact, he is joining us this morning. And we have a joyful note for Mary Beard, who will turn 88 years old on October 10th. Please come to the Caring Network table to sign the card for Mary. Now, if you wish, you are invited to come forward to place a pebble in the bowl, to represent a joy or concern, let us take this time to feel more deeply connected to the spirit of love that dwells within us and between us, and to feel closer to that which is of transcendent value and concern to us. In this calm space, we can remember that there is more to life than our material state, our homes, and our state of health or sickness. We can remember that we are part of a wonderful process of life, a process that began long before we were born and will continue after we leave this world. We are connected with each person in this room, with friends and family, the community we live in, and with the world. With each breath we take in, we are reminded of the air we share with the animals of the earth, the oxygen we are provided with by the plants of the earth. We can be grateful for the air and the food we have been given. Even though our time on this earth is limited, we can feel gratitude for the precious time we have been granted. Let us endeavor to use this time wisely and lovingly to treat our fellow travelers well, with respect, love, and compassion. Let it be so. Now let us take a minute to share a time
of readings this morning. In an interview, Joseph Campbell, 20th century professor of comparative mythology, speaks about Western culture's idea of the individual. He says, "One of the big spiritual truths of the West is that each of us is a unique creature and consequently has a unique path. There's one quotation I ran into in the Quest for the Holy Grail which hit me as being especially the essence of what I'd call the European or Western spirituality. The knights of Arthur's court were seated at table, and Arthur would not let the meal be served until an adventure occurred. Well, a lot of adventures occurred, so they didn't have to wait too long. So indeed, an adventure did occur. The Grail appeared, carried by angelic miracle, covered, however, by a cloth. Everyone was in rapture, and then it withdrew. Arthur's nephew, Gawain, stood up and said, 'I propose a vow. I propose that we should all go forth in pursuit of this Grail to behold it unveiled.' It was determined that that was what they would do. And then occur these lines, which seem to me to be wonderful. They thought it would be a disgrace to go forth in a group. Each entered the forest that he had chosen where there was no path and where it was darkest. Now, if there's a path, that's someone else's path. What is unknown is the fulfillment of your unique life, the likes of which has never existed on earth, and you are the only one that can do it. And in the way of your own talents is the only way you can do it." And then another reading, well, you'll recognize this, and you'll recognize one of the most famous characters in English literature. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out, generous fire, secret, self-contained, solitary as an oyster. Scrooge is visited by charitable solicitors. "At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge," said the gentleman, taking up a pen, "it's more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and the destitute." "Are there no prisons?" asked Scrooge. "Plenty of prisons," said the gentleman, laying down his pen. "And the union workhouses?" demanded Scrooge. "Are they still in operation?" "They are still," returned the gentleman. I wish I could say they were not." "The treadmill and the poor law, they're all in full vigor then," said Scrooge. "Both very busy, sir." "Oh, I was afraid from what you said at first that something had occurred to stop them in their usual course," said Scrooge. "I'm very glad to hear it." And then Scrooge encountered Marley's ghost. Scrooge says, But you were always a good man of business, Jacob, faltered Scrooge, who was beginning to apply these things to himself. Business? Cried the ghost, wringing his hands again. Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, and benevolence, they were all my business. The dealings of my trade were but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of business. The ghost held up its chain at arm's length, as if that were the cause of its unveiling grief, and flung it heavily on the ground again. And then a quotation from the philosopher Jacob Needleman. He wrote, this is from an interview. He said, I know it sounds paradoxical. People can be obsessed with money, but that doesn't mean they take it seriously. If we're on a spiritual quest for self-transformation, we need to give our best attention to how we are with money, because it's one of the key ways to a big part of our human nature. A human being, according to the greatest spiritual teachings of the world, has two natures or aspects. A side that is meant to be engaged in activity in the world, making, doing, having a family, creating, building. The other side has to do with the spiritual, the transcendent, the relationship to God, if you will, one's inner consciousness. Those two natures make up who we are. The meaning of our life in the material world, how we eat, how we work, and we raise families and create, only emerges when it is connected to the spiritual world. The meaning of spirit appears when it is related to our life in the world. While we're on this earth, we are meant to be in relationship to these two worlds. The real meaning of life comes when you feel and know that there's a connection. And finally, on board the Arbella, on the Atlantic Ocean, John Winthrop wrote a sermon entitled, A Model of Christian Charity. With his fellow Puritan colonists, Winthrop was about to found the Massachusetts Bay Colony and become its governor. It was 1630. Here are a couple of excerpts from that sermon, expressing his hope for the new world. We hope that every man might have need of others, and from hence they might be all knit more nearly together in the bonds of brotherly affection. From hence it appears plainly that no man is made more honorable than the other, or more wealthy, out of any particular and singular respect to himself, but for the glory of his Creator and the common good of the creature, humankind. There are two rules whereby we walk one towards the other: justice and mercy. To apply this to the works of mercy, this law requires two things. First, that every man afford to his help to another in every want or distress. Secondly, that he perform this out of the same affection which makes him careful of his own goods, according to that injunction, whatsoever you would do to men, they should do to you. We must entertain each other in brotherly affection. We must be willing to abridge ourselves of excesses for the supply of others' necessities. We must hold a familiar commerce together in meekness, gentleness, patience, liberality. We must delight in each other, make others' conditions our own. Rejoice together, mourn together, labor and suffer together, always having before our eyes our commission and community in the work. As members of the same body, so shall we keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. For we must consider that we shall be a city upon a hill. The eyes of all people are upon us.
I was lying in a burned out basement with the full moon in my eye. I was hoping for replacement when the sun burst through the sky. There was a band playing in my head, and I felt like I could cry. I was thinking about what a friend had said. I was hoping it was a lie. Thinking about what a friend had said. I hoping it was a lie. Spaceships flying in the yellow haze of the sun. There were children crying and colors flying all around the chosen ones. All in a dream, all in a dream. The loading had begun. Flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home in the sun. Flying Mother Nature's silver seed to a new home.
When the stock market crashed on October 24th, 1929, my father was 9 years old. My mother was 8. They were children of the Great Depression, and this life experience marked them for the rest of their lives. Yet their circumstances were somewhat different. On my mother's side, my grandfather was a common laborer with the minimum education that the hills of northeast Pennsylvania could afford in the late 19th century, early 20th centuries. He had perhaps an 8th grade level schooling, probably more like the 6th grade. He'd learned the skills of carpentry, at least in terms of building construction, but during the Great Depression, no one was building, and he was out of work for long periods of time. With a wife and 5 children, things were difficult. My mother, who helped in the kitchen, and who ultimately became the cook for the family when my grandmother was debilitated by rheumatic fever, remembered the spans of several days in a row when dinner was a repeat of potato soup, potato soup, potato soup. For my dad, things were different, better. My grandfather on that side worked for the Curtis Publishing Company. This was one of the major American magazine publishing companies in the early and middle 20th century. If you remember the Saturday Evening Post, Holiday Magazine, Jack and Jill. He set type and even did some basic copy proofreading and never lost his job, although his hours were curtailed from time to time. So potato soup was optional on that dinner table. At many dinner tables in the home where I grew up, my mom preached the lessons of her experience. My sisters and I heard about potato soup a lot. That refrain, if sometimes too frequent or too extended, could put my dad on edge. Okay, kids, get the violin section started. Here comes the potato soup again. And he'd do a kind of violinist gesture, air gesture, his own kind of Fiddler on the Roof. If I were a rich man, a kind of mimicry. My mom didn't appreciate it. But my mother's message was clear and got through. No one out there is going to take care of you. You must fend for yourself. Work hard, be frugal, save for the future. You never know what's around the corner. Keep at it. My dad didn't really disagree. He quietly lived the same message. Keep working, save for all contingencies. Money doesn't grow on trees. Be acquainted with its value. And while you're doing that, by the way, be a good person. Now, these are all good lessons, but when I ask the question, how much is enough for the future? I never heard a definitive answer. So you're on your own, I was taught. Learn to take care of yourself. Individualism is perhaps the greatest legacy of the world from European culture. Individual freedom, individual creativity, individual responsibility. These have led to democracy, entrepreneurship, economic achievement, and personal satisfaction for many. The ethos of individualism has come through many myths and legend. The Knights of the Round Table thought it would be a disgrace to go on a quest together. and they entered the forest by hacking through the underbrush, each on their own. To be on an existing path was to be on someone else's path, and thus to be inauthentic. Be yourself, Oscar Wilde famously said. Everyone else is already taken. Now, all of us want to be responsible for ourselves. We don't want to be a burden to others, and we're afraid that we might be. So we try to build a material resource as a buffer against that fear. That was my parents' lesson in the Great Depression. And in this materialistic, consumer-driven society of which we're a part, this need for individual safety tends to lose its way and become obsessed with more, more, more. We may even tend to see our self-worth through material aggregation. When is enough too much? I suppose the literary archetype for the soul lost in material acquisition is our famous Ebenezer Scrooge, frosty, snarly, snarky old sinner whose heart had been hardened by a difficult family, rejection in romantic love, the death of dear ones. Here was one who had given himself over to acquisition. It defined him, and he lived in it. Scrooge's creator, Charles Dickens, came from poverty himself, and he knew about the drive for more. If you're in writer's block or your writing isn't selling, he demurred at one point, write a ghost story. They always sell. Hence, A Christmas Carol. But for Scrooge, enough was never too much. I talked to an acquaintance once who was an investment banker and estate planner. I greeted him on the phone cheerfully. Hey, Tom, how are you? I'm the same as always, he replied rather exhaustively. The markets had slumped that week, as they have recently. I'm dealing all day with people's fear and greed, he confessed. When I hung up the phone, I thought, what a job. What a life. Weren't these exactly the human attributes that the Buddha thought to try to transcend on the way to enlightenment, fear and desire? When is enough too much? If out of fear and desire, all of us simply devote ourselves to the consuming acquisition of more, what are the social implications of our actions in terms of social policy? Those implications are not good. I had the honor of speaking with a number of you last month from this pulpit about the environment when we went cosmic camping together. If the world of our species simply consumes, can our good earth sustain us for long? The environment is threatened right now by our wanton overuse of its sustenance. Should we hasten the onset of an existential crisis that seems to be impending? Neil Young seems to point to that inevitability in his visionary song, After the Gold Rush. And what of our concern for social justice? Each of us keeps acquiring more. If that's the case, are we not taking sustenance away from others who are in need? Will our consumption enable us to be the hands of justice, restoring that world worthy of our children? Or will we simply create greater injustice? And what of our happiness? What does more and more material resource make us happy, make us happier? In study after study, I'm impressed by the results. The United States has a tremendously high rate of material wealth, but we're not that happy about it. Other nations with similar high wealth standards, principally certain Scandinavian countries, always poll more positively on the issue of happiness. One of the reasons appears to be that our country continues to be locked into an awful income inequality among our population. Where wealth is more evenly distributed, happiness is greater. After decades of talk about it, and despite some successes, I'm still waiting for the trickle of trickle down, at least for it to have some significant effect. Instead of trickle down, we have a torrent of wealth flowing upward to the 2% of our population where an inordinate amount of our overall economic wealth resides. So, faced with these heady social problems and the challenges of our individual material well-being and security, how and where do we find the balance that we need to live successfully in a society that values everything by gain, where there's a price on everything? Well, not all of our resources are material. In his book, Money and the Meaning of Life, Jacob Needleman tries to set us on a useful course in understanding the importance, but not the over-importance, of the material world, a world whose description is often seen as money. As the coin of the realm of this immediate worldly existence we're living, money represents one side of the experience of life. It's not wrong to have money or to acquire it for the basic needs of living in this society. But money in the material experience of life, and the question of how much is too much, are lost without the overall context of meaning. Needleman says in a published interview, and I quote, "What we've done wrong with money has to do with an increasing error about our understanding of what it means to be a human being in our culture. At the same time, there are movements introducing spiritual ideas into culture, much more now than 20 years ago. At the center of the problem is a loss of what brings meaning to our lives. That was the point of my book. Money can buy anything except meaning." To put it in a nutshell, it comes from the balance of those two parts of ourselves, the material and the spiritual. And he continues, "That's the most important thing in our life, meaning. You can have all kinds of pleasure, but without meaning you wind up with despair. What I've discovered since writing that book is that human beings were built to give. To put it in the most extreme form, we're built to love and serve something greater than ourselves, whether it's other people, something you call God, or whether it's justice. Until we're finding our way to give, there will be no happiness or meaning. Temporarily, I can feel I'm succeeded and being respected, but in the end, there has to be a kind of giving. That's what we've not understood, because giving has been reduced to some kind of tax deduction." For Needleman, end quote, for Needleman, finding success in life is not acquiring material and its monetary representative, but rather discovering what our gifts as human beings are and sharing those gifts. Again, Needleman says, whether you play the piano, write books, earn money, or whether you're good with children, and you have served your gift by helping other people, then that's the key. Of course, you have to be sharp, strong, clever, competitive, and care for the material sides of life, but in the overall trajectory of life, if your life has served other human beings, then that would be success. And money, Needleman says, is a means to the end of finding meaning. Again, quote, "Money helps you do what you want to do, and what you want to do is something that will bring your life meaning. It helps to accomplish those things. It should assist as an instrument, the search for meaning. If one is searching for something honorably human, money should aid that. It's a tool, not an end in itself. Then you have to ask yourself, what is it doing for me? What am I doing that money is serving?" End quote. Where can I find the place to balance the worldly and deeper aspirations of the human spirit? The worship theme for this month is the idea of covenant. It's a concept fraught with difficulty for us because of its biblical connotations and the theocratic implications of the many covenants of the earliest Puritan settlers. We'll hear more about this from Reverend Elaine in the following weeks. And we heard a bit of it this morning in the readings from John Winthrop on his way to North America in 1620. But Winthrop wanted his Massachusetts Bay Colony to be that shining city on the hill as an example to others of the colonists' positive values. In its purest, unglossed definition, covenant just means that commitment, agreement, and pledge toward shared values. It is here with you, in a community committed to shared values, that I find the context in which to strive to balance my life between the everyday material world and my spiritual aspirations. Here at UUCMP. Here is where I can search for meaning, safely supported by you. Here is where I can find the courage to ask myself the hard questions, like, when is enough material too much? Here, supported by you, is where I can feel safe, mitigating the twin pitfalls of fear and desire. Here is where the individualism of our national ethos makes sense, where I can find who I am, what gifts I've been given, where and how I might share them. Here is where I may find the bridge over the troubled waters of materialism, and while prudently working to support myself, making sure that I do not give in to wanton consumerism, or define myself solely by the material world, or turn my back on the large social questions of the environment, social justice, and income inequality. For me, if material gain is obstructing these goals, then that's too much. Supported by you, I can function responsibly in both the material and spiritual sides of life and find balance and meaning and access my own answer about when is enough material too much. Each of you must reflect upon this and answer for yourselves. I sometimes think of skylines as I mark the declension of spiritual aspects in American society. In the 17th century, Winthrop wanted his Massachusetts Bay Colony settlement to be the shining city on the hill based on religious values. But the 19th century, it was Washington, D.C. that began to build a skyline of political buildings. And finally, in the 20th century, the New York skyline became a shrine to banking, finance, and big business. That's all about money and securities, deposits, loans, withdrawals, and interest rates. But you and I have another kind of bank at our disposal at UUCMP. It's all about meaning and positive values of the human spirit: love, empathy, compassion, sharing, caring, hope, joy, justice. In this bank, we have the security of our mutual support and respect. We deposit the gifts that each of us uniquely brings to share. Loans and withdrawals are unlimited. And for our participation, we're paid in eternal interest. In this institution of values, we never have enough or too much. And so we sit upon our beautiful hill here in Carmel. Are we not called in humility to throw open the doors of our spiritual bank, to proclaim our message of love and hope and justice to our community, the Peninsula, Salinas, all of Monterey County, to be that example of transformative change which we seek for ourselves and the world around us, of the courage and will to do so? May we never have enough or too much. So may it be. Amen. And now let's stand together and sing our closing hymn, Lean on Me. Please remain standing for the extinguishment of the chalice and the benediction.
Please join me in reading the words in your order of service. We extinguish this chalice, but take its light into our lives, to be the presence of love in the midst of fear, the voice of hope in the face of despair, and the hands of justice restoring a world worthy of our children.
Now I invite you to join hands or elbows or whatever seems appropriate for the benediction. The benediction today is a 6-line poem by a friend of ours, Marsh Pittman. It was written by Marsh on visiting Mount Cook, New Zealand. He wrote, "Once you've seen the mountain, you know it exists, though there be clouds. Once you know love, you know it exists, though there be clouds. And to that I say, now go forth into the week ahead, and may you know love, the true love that shimmers through every worldly cloud, and may you have peace. Amen." Please be seated and remain quietly for the postlude.